They say empires fall from war, famine, or plague, but Europe once came to its knees because of something far quieter, far more humiliating, and far more absurd. A king who borrowed so much money he accidentally detonated the entire continent's financial system. Because in the late Middle Ages and early Renaissance, before central banks, before bond markets, before anyone understood how debt could strangle nations, the wealth of Europe flowed through a handful of banking families: the Medici, the Bardi, the Peruzzi, the Fuggers, men who loaned fortunes to monarchs who treated interest payments as optional suggestions rather than obligations, and none were more reckless, more delusional, or more catastrophically expensive than King Edward III of England, whose obsession with war, glory, and conquest pushed him to borrow sums so enormous that his default in 1343 didn't just bankrupt his lenders, but imploded the entire credit network of Europe, causing a financial shockwave so severe that cities collapsed, trade froze, banking dynasties disappeared overnight, and the medieval economy, already fragile, stretched by droughts, plague, and political turmoil, simply snapped. Because when a king declares he cannot pay his debts, every merchant downstream panics, every bank upstream collapses, and every ruler watching begins to realize that the entire system they depend on is nothing more than paper promises held together by trust. And trust evaporates the moment a monarch shrugs and says, "I can't pay," which is exactly what Edward III did after borrowing today's equivalent of billions to fund his early campaigns in the Hundred Years' War, a conflict so expensive that it turned the English treasury into a black hole, devouring gold, silver, taxes, wool revenues, and eventually the patience of every banker in Florence, who continued lending because kings, they believed, were eternal and therefore trustworthy, until Edward defaulted, wiping out the Bardi and Peruzzi families almost instantly, triggering riots in Florence, collapsing municipal budgets across Italy, and setting off a chain reaction that spread through France, Flanders, the Hanseatic ports, and the German states, where credit dried up so violently that entire industries disappeared, and suddenly Europe realized the most frightening economic truth of the medieval world. The credit system was not decentralized, diversified, or resilient, but utterly dependent on a handful of men lending to a handful of kings. And if even one pillar collapsed, the entire cathedral of European finance crumbled with it, which is exactly what happened as the continent spiraled into recession, wages cratered, trade networks rusted, interest rates soared, governments cut spending, and the few remaining banking houses retreated into survival mode, refusing to lend to monarchs whose promises were now worthless, creating a paradox where kings needed loans to wage war, but wars destroyed the creditworthiness needed to secure loans, trapping Europe in a self-perpetuating crisis, all because Edward III, a king obsessed with honor and victory, treated the financial system like an infinite purse and then acted shocked when his failure to repay emptied half the continent into chaos. And the irony is that this disaster, this continent-wide credit implosion, happened just years before the Black Death, meaning Europe experienced a financial collapse followed by demographic annihilation. A one-two punch so devastating that it permanently altered the political and economic structure of the continent. And yet, buried beneath the pandemics and wars of the era, most people forget that it all began not with plague, famine, or invasion, but with a royal signature on a loan contract, a string of reckless borrowings, and a final, fatal declaration that the King of England was broke, unwilling to pay, and perfectly willing to let the entire financial architecture of Europe burn, proving once and for all that even in the medieval world, long before Wall Street, bonds, or central banks, debt could kill continents, and the wrong borrower could destroy civilization.